After a long day, I like to unwind with a warm bath and a floral bath bomb. I had a tray where I put my laptop and watched whatever topped the Netflix top 10 that week. Sometimes I'd bring a glass of white wine, especially after a stressful day, and melt into the warm, fragrant water until my body was nice and pruny. I'd learned little rituals like those from all my hard work. Only after a decade of hustling, brown-nosing, and occasionally lying did I work my way to the top of the agency. The title of director had a nice ring to it. Looking at my life as a movie, not only was I the star, but I pulled the strings and chose the story beats. I had peaked, accomplishing everything I was set out to do, and I was still in my early 30s. As a child, I was rambunctious. Like many, I dealt with some issues at home, and I vented that stress in less than productive ways. It took more work to become mature and compassionate than it did to become successful. But after years of therapy, volunteering, and effective altruism, I metamorphosed, shedding my dirty past to thrive. But the problem with peaking is that there's only one way to go from there. Nobody likes watching somebody peak. It hurts their neck to crane it so far backward. My downfall would never be by my own hand. I was too disciplined, too cautious. No, my downfall would only come if greedy, grubby cold hands dragged me down. The day she came back into my life started well. My department spearheaded a massively successful initiative. I took a bow while dozens of hands patted my back. I couldn't keep a smile off my face for the rest of the day, even when I returned to my apartment's comfortable solitude. The bath called to me. I kicked off my shoes, threw my purse on the bed, and scurried off to the bathroom. In my little fortress, I could celebrate my victory peacefully. After setting up, I dipped a toe in the tepid water and slid in, letting out a long, deep sigh and allowing the steam to fill my lungs and cleanse me of impurities. Instead of watching anything, I languished in perfect, serene silence. As I was slipping into a state close to nirvana, the drain gurgled. Little bubbles broke the water's surface, sending tiny ripples toward me. I remember plugging the drain clearly, so this was odd. Before I could adjust my position to fix the leak, a single hair floated from the drain to the bath's surface. I'd always been a blonde. How the hell did a black hair get in my pipes? I picked the hair up and held it to the light. It was long, coarse, and a deep jet black. Before I could contemplate further, another hair drifted to the surface, then another. 10 more followed until a tangled mess floated on the water's surface. I backed up to the edge of the tub and gagged. Some faulty plumbing must have spat up all this disgusting gunk into my tub. Didn't want to touch it. They looked dirty, and who could have guessed where they came from? As I pulled myself out of the bath, more hair surfaced in large clumps. After only a second, black hair blanketed the tub. With a girlish squeal, I slipped, smacking my head on the porcelain lip and sinking back into the water. My surroundings spun as my brain struggled through dizziness. As I found my bearings, the island of hair stirred, slowly raising itself from the water. I gripped the sides of the tub, still fighting the vertigo. The hair elevated until a curtain of it stood at human height. I desperately tried to drag my body out of the water, but the terror made my arms too weak to move.
Help!
I shrieked, straining my voice to its limit and beyond.
Somebody help!
I kicked at the water, splashing it around the bathroom. My hands scrambled for something to defend myself and landed on a soap dish, which I chucked at the hair figure. The dish hit it and plunged into the water harmlessly. finally recovered, I dragged myself to my feet and lifted a leg to throw myself from the tub. But before I could, 2 long black tendrils of hair shot from the mound and wrapped around my wrists.
Wait!
I yelped. Before I could protest further, the tendrils pinned me to the wall. A pale hand emerged from the curtain of hair and dragged it aside, revealing a petite figure shrouded in darkness. Another hand emerged and moved the remaining hair out of the way, fully exposing its face. The figure was a young girl in a school uniform. Other than her dark, empty eye sockets, she had bland features. Her clothes were familiar, the same uniform as the school I had attended. My legs gave out, and the only things holding me up were the tendrils of hair.
But please!
I sputtered, closing my eyes and turning away from her. Tears mingled with the droplets of water covering my soaking body. She was silent. Eventually, I opened my eyes and looked back. She started coughing, her body lurching until she hacked out a massive clump of hair. The girl dropped it into the bathwater.
Hello, Dee. Remember me?
Her voice was gravelly, yet still childish. It was difficult to see through the tears that clouded my vision, but once I did, her name came to me immediately, but I could only whimper it out.
Hannah? Is that you? You've been well, haven't you? It's been a while. Do you ever think about me?
Her hair moved through the water, snake-like and independent. The strands that bound my wrists tightened. I had trouble forming words. The situation wasn't processing. Thousands of thoughts and questions bounced around my head, clogging the exit and leaving me paralyzed.
Hannah disappeared. What are you?
I finally shouted, struggling against my restraints.
Why does that matter? I'm here now. Why do you think I'm here, Dee?
She smiled, baring grey teeth clogged with hair. It had been 14 years since I'd thought about Hannah. Honestly, I'd been repressing the memories.
I don't know. Let go of me.
I kicked out, flinging water over the bathroom floor. Hannah, or whatever took her appearance, dropped her smile.
Yes, you do. Take a guess. Remember this face. Remember this body. The last time you saw it.
Her voice escaped in a low growl. She looked 17, exactly how I remembered her. The last time I saw her face was on a memorial post. Those awful memories drudged up again. The way she turned out. The things we did to her.
I'm sorry, Hannah. Please forgive me.
I said through tears. My wrists ached under the strain of Hannah's grasp.
Tell me what you did.
Hannah grinned, reveling in my fear and desperation.
Say it. We were kids. You know I didn't...
Hannah jammed a tendril into my mouth and down my throat. I coughed, spluttering. The strands tickled my esophagus, and I fought down vomit as they wrapped around my uvula. Panicking around the choking mass of hair, I whipped my head around and lashed out with my feet in rapid, desperate kicks. Just before blacking out, Hannah withdrew the hair from my mouth. I retched and gasped for air, eyes watering. Rage burned in Hannah's empty eye sockets.
What did you do to me, Dee?
Her low voice reverberated in my small bathroom. I searched my memories, opening that vault I'd kept hidden for over a decade. I remembered the bathrooms where my friends and I stripped her naked and locked her in overnight. We cackled while she wailed for help for hours on end.
We hurt you.
My voice shook. I could hardly form the words. I remembered the rumors we spread about her. The whole school believed she'd sold her body to any man she could find.
We humiliated you.
Hannah's face was stoic. The one time she stood up for herself, demanding we set the record straight on the rumors we spread. We took her outside and beat her senseless, only aiming for the body so nobody could see the bruises.
We tortured you,
I confessed, hanging my head as the shame I'd pushed away for so long welled up inside me.
Then what happened, Dee? How did it all end?
Hannah waded closer until she was inches from my face. Her breath smelled like dead leaves and dirt. The last times I saw her were a poster and a quick announcement to the parents from the school. 14 years ago, she went missing without a trace.
I really don't know. You disappeared without a word.
I turned my head away from her.
They found me eventually, though. There I was, after 2 years, lying in the bottom of a well with these carved into my arms and legs.
Hannah lifted her sleeves, revealing a forearm covered in strange cultist symbols.
And this is my mouth.
Hannah put her hand in her mouth and forced it down her throat. Her jaw unhinged, allowing it to slip further into her gullet. After a sharp yank, she pulled out a small doll with a nail through its torso. Hannah held out the doll for me to see.
How pretty.
The doll was my spitting image. Same blonde hair, brown eyes, even the mole on my cheek. Hannah swallowed the doll before caressing my cheek with a freezing cold, clammy hand.
I've been waiting so long, Dee. It's the perfect time. You're finally ripe.
I recoiled at her touch.
We were just kids, Hannah. I had my own issues that I took out on you. I'm sorry, really. Please forgive me. I've grown up. I promise.
I babbled at her with my eyes locked shut. I couldn't bear to look at that face. I was proud of who I'd become. I tried to put the kind of person I was behind me. Now, confronted with whatever Hannah had become, all the gross was for nothing.
Oh, you grew up. Did you, Dee?
Hannah grabbed my face and forced my eyes open, her forehead nearly touching mine.
I didn't. I never could. You are the reason why. I'm just here to make things fair. Hannah, I'm begging you. I've really changed. You don't know how much I went through.
I was back to tearful pleas. Snot dripped into my mouth, and I spat out the occasional long, black hair. Hannah finally released the restraints on my wrists, and I tumbled back into the bathtub. She floated out of the water and drifted across the room until she stood by the light switch.
You don't know how long I've been waiting for this. I've never felt so alive.
Hannah threw her head back and laughed, a sound like hundreds of rocks grinding against each other. I covered my ears and winced. Hannah stopped laughing and cleared her throat.
Don't worry. I won't linger forever. All you need to do is learn the lesson, and I'll be gone. What lesson? I'll do anything, I swear.
A clump of hair fell from my mouth. With this ghost before me, tormenting me, I wanted to hate her, but I had to accept that I had brought this on myself. I wanted to make things right, if that meant taking whatever that thing had in store.
It wouldn't be much of a lesson if I spelled it out for you.
She grinned.
Hannah, let's start simple. You've always hated these, right? Remember, they love tight, dark spaces. So cover up.
Hannah gave one final wave before flicking the light switch off. The room plunged into darkness. I tried to step out of the bathtub, but my legs were so weak that I tripped and fell to the tile floor. I needed to get to the light and get the hell out of there. As I stumbled to my feet, something scuttled up my leg. I squealed and swatted at it, but 4 more creatures followed, crawling across my damp, naked body. Soon, dozens of little tickly things swarmed my feet and scaled my torso. I shrieked again, and dashed to where I thought the light switch was. In my mad flailing, I knocked toiletries from the sink onto the floor. The glass soap dispenser and hand mirror shattered, scattering invisible glass in my path.
Help!
I shouted to nobody. I stepped into the glass, lodging dozens of tiny pieces into my feet. Howling in pain, I stumbled forward and careened headfirst into the light switch, illuminating the room. Bugs poured from every drain. They covered the walls, blanketed the floor, and dropped from the ceiling. The creatures covered my body, hundreds of tiny spiders and centipedes inches up my arms, legs, torso, and neck, closer and closer to my face. After all the screaming before, I shook, horrified into a silent scream. The blood drained from my face, leaving me numb and pale. The bugs crawled across my petrified body. Some legs crept into both ears. I smacked at them, then flailed about, throwing my limbs around in a frenzy. 3 spiders entered each ear. I dug around with my fingers, but they were too deep. My heart felt ready to burst. My breaths were sharp and shallow. By that point, bugs completely obscured my skin. Centipedes covered my lips, mandible biting at me, leveraging the seal, preventing them from slithering into my mouth. I couldn't fight anymore. My throat was too strained to scream, so I cried silently while the bugs consumed me. Just as the centipede squeezed past my lips, all the bugs retreated, leaving every orifice and scrambling away from my body before disappearing down the drains. I slumped to the ground, pressing my back against the tile. My stomach turned, so I flipped over and emptied my guts onto the floor. It took half an hour for me to move. The room spun. My body was so shot full of adrenaline that every nerve tingled. Finally, I got my senses back. I plucked the shards of glass from my feet, wincing in pain as my hands dripped blood. I limped to the door, leaving the nightmarish scene behind. My room was dark and empty, so I flipped on the light.
Have you learned anything yet?
Hannah sat on my bed, dangling her legs over the side and rocking them back and forth. I jumped back, nearly running back into the bathroom before stopping myself. I couldn't finish. I burst into tears, hugging my knees on the floor.
You don't look very good. Here, I brought someone to comfort you.
Hannah pointed at the ceiling. A body dropped from out of sight, dangling by the ankles on a rope. It was a woman. She faced away from me.
Look, I brought your excuse. Say hi.
Hannah waved her hand, and the dangling woman spun to face me. My mother, looking the same as she did when I was a teen, locked eyes with me and groaned. I hadn't seen her since I left for college. She was my tormentor. I swore I would never share a room with her, and now she dangled from my bedroom ceiling.
Get her out of here! Get out!
I jumped to my feet and shouted at the hanging body and living corpse next to her.
You're right. You have a big day at work tomorrow. Don't miss it.
Hannah said, as a rope dragged Mother's body into the darkness.
That's not a suggestion.
Hannah hopped off the bed and walked into a dark corner of the room, disappearing into the shadows. I stood frozen for at least 10 minutes. Shaking, I crawled naked under my covers, shielding myself completely from the world outside my tiny blanket fort. It was an old habit I developed as a kid. I would barricade myself on my bed with a tiny light that illuminated the space under the mound of blankets. In there, I was safe from danger, safe from pain. Hannah called her my excuse, which was accurate. It was me and Mum for all of my childhood, and she got more resentful the more I became a burden. I would act out, and she would smack me around, so I would act out again. While it's cliché to say it's true that hurt people, especially kids, that's what I was. A stupid kid with no impulse control, and Hannah was collateral damage. The night was long and agonizing. I spent every moment tensing my body for some kind of attack. There was no safety in my home. If anything, I needed out as soon as possible. Where could I even go? A friend's? But I didn't have any. I never made the time. Family? Of course not. That sounded nearly as bad as spending time with a walking corpse. My feet throbbed. The sloppy bandaging I'd attempted wasn't holding up well. So, with no better option, I pulled myself together to go to the office. Maybe, if I was lucky, I was simply going crazy, nothing that I couldn't solve with the right medication and some talk therapy. It was a difficult drive when I jumped at every shadow. Eventually, I pulled up to the building. Baggy, bloodshot eyes, unkempt hair, a sloppily thrown together outfit. I must have looked ghoulish. I stumbled out of the car and into the lobby. When I walked up to the receptionist, I struggled to see her face. My vision was smudged, completely obscuring her features. She waved at me, and I ignored her, walking straight to the elevator. A single person was in the elevator, someone dressed in a heavy coat and facing away from me. I gingerly pressed the button for my floor and shuffled in beside them. The door slid shut, leaving me with a stranger. The ride took much longer than usual. At least a minute passed, and we barely reached the 3rd floor. The person facing the wall coughed once into their hand. I glanced at the screen showing our floor. It wasn't even halfway to my destination. I inched away toward the other corner of the elevator, begging it to hurry, but time stood still. The person broke into a full fit of coughing. Phlegm caught in their throat. The wet, choking noise made me sick.
Are you all right?
I asked, pressing my body into the furthest corner away from them. They spat something to the floor, a ball of tangled black hair that squelched and dripped with saliva. It didn't stop with one clump. They kept hacking up more hair. A small pile of hair formed at their feet. I clung to the rail with all my might, preparing to kick, claw, bite, whatever it took to make it out in one piece. The elevator stopped at their floor. The ding cut off their spitting and hacking. My wary, tired body hardly had the strength to quiver in fear. Without a word, the stranger walked out of the elevator. They turned to me as soon as they exited. Like the receptionist, their face was blurry. I couldn't tell if something was wrong with me or just a trick of the light, but they were smudged and unrecognizable. They whispered something I couldn't understand and waved at me while the doors closed behind them. When the doors closed, I nearly collapsed in relief. As the elevator climbed to the next floor, I did my best to ignore the hair and spit dirtying the floor. Finally, I arrived, the door sliding open to my floor. The workplace lounge was empty. I walked to my office. I could hear distant chatter from the cubicles, and my co-workers' shoes were visible. But all of them hid behind the low walls. I moved in closer to where they gathered. At least 6 of my team members crouched behind the dividers, whispering to each other and giggling.
Guys, what are you doing?
I called out. Besides them, the office was empty. When I made my presence clear, there were more giggles and shushing, like a group of kids planning a surprise party. I moved in closer and rounded the corner to confront them. But the only thing behind the cubicles were 6 pairs of empty shoes. I whipped my head around, trying to find the source of the giggling. But from what I could see, the room was empty. A firm hand latched onto my shoulder from behind. I shrieked and jumped forward, twisting to confront whatever touched me. It was David, a a co-worker of mine. But instead of his normal appearance, black hair grew from his eye sockets and fell to the floor, sweeping the tile.
"What's wrong, Diana? Come here. Don't you want to be held?"
David stretched out his arms. Like his eye sockets, hair sprouted from his fingernails. He inched closer. I turned to run, but crashed into someone else. We ended up on the floor, with me mounting the thrashing pile. Their hands shot up and seized my neck, clenching and throttling me. Their face was blurry like the others. They were shirtless, their torso littered with bruises. I struggled for air, clawing at their hands, but their grip didn't come loose. I scrambled for something to defend myself. The adrenaline coursing through me gave me the frantic strength to momentarily break free and grab a nearby stapler. The person squealed like a pig, grabbing my neck again. Before they squeezed my throat shut, I bashed their head with the stapler. They kept moving, so I hit them again. Blood coated the instrument and spurted onto the floor. Relief, neither expected nor wanted, welled up inside me. After being at Hannah's whims, I could kill this thing that threatened me. It was a familiar feeling, one that I forced myself to forget long ago. After the fourth bash, the person under me went still. Their arms fell to their sides and their chests didn't rise and fall. I stood up over my kill, my heart hammering out of my chest. When I looked up from the bloody mess on the ground, 10 of my co-workers stood in stunned silence.
Diana, what did you do?"
David backed away from me, his body back to normal. I looked around at the faces of my co-workers. Kelly from HR was white as a sheet. She doubled over and threw up on the floor. Michael from my team had a phone in his hand, filming the whole thing. The person under me came into focus. It was another member of my team, a colleague intern named Sarah. Nobody moved. Our office didn't seem to have any heroes. I looked into their eyes. They looked at me with fear, revulsion, and confusion.
What? But you all...
I dropped the stapler and sprinted for the elevator. As shameful as it was, I needed to flee before they caught me. It wasn't my fault. Hannah tricked me. How was it my fault? As the elevator closed behind me, David regained his wits and tried to tend to Sarah. 3 others already had their phones to their ears, probably dialing 911.
I didn't know you still had that in you.
Hannah stood in the corner of the elevator.
"You made me do it. I killed a person. I'm fucked. Oh God."
I slid down the wall of the elevator into a seated position.
Poor Sarah. You won't even spare her a thought.
Hannah said. I hadn't considered Sarah. I had bigger things to worry about, and Hannah knew that.
Have you learned the lesson yet?
She asked, twiddling with her hair.
"What fucking lesson? How is there a lesson in any of this?"
I put my head to my chest and hyperventilated. How could it all have come crashing down so quickly?
You're getting closer, Dee.
"How many times do I have to say I'm sorry? Does this make anything better for you?"
Why should I suffer alone? Wasn't that why you did all those things to me?
"No,
I looked up at Hannah, but she was gone before I raised my head. I pulled at my hair and slammed a fist into the wall. The sharp crack of my hand against the wood echoed in the tiny enclosed space. The elevator arrived in the lobby. I sprinted through the doors the moment they opened and dashed out the door, past the receptionist, to my car. Where could I go? My wild escape wouldn't amount to much. It would have been better to wait for the police to arrive and turn myself in quietly. But I didn't want to go out without a fight. The spite that fueled me for years came back to me. I would go down swinging. I picked a random direction and peeled off. After an hour of speeding down the highway, I heard someone clear their throat in the back seat.
Take the next exit.
Hannah ordered me. I was long past being surprised by her presence. Her face was stoic, her usual playfulness absent. Her boring face, her thin, pale body, and the hair that ran past her waist. I hated all of it. I thought I was ready to accept punishment from her, but looking at her filled me with such visceral hatred. Why should I? Everything is over anyway. I might as well end it on my own terms, I shot back. Well, Dee, if you learn the lesson, I might make things normal again. How about that? I nearly slammed on the brakes. If there was still the slightest chance I could fix this, I'd take it without question. I neared an unfamiliar exit, but the scenery was oddly familiar. We passed a quiet suburban neighborhood and then pulled to the school from my memories, the school where I had met Hannah. Keep going. We're headed to the reserve, she said. I drove on obediently until stopping before a trail that led into dense woods. The reserve. Every street and building since the exit was empty, and the reserve was no different. Hannah got out first, and I trailed behind. We trekked for around a mile before coming up on a well. I think you can guess what's down there. Hannah pointed at the well. I walked over and peeked down the hole. 30 feet below me, a fresh corpse filled the dry well. Its legs contorted in the wrong direction, and the final expression was one of agony. Even from that far away, I could tell. So, Dee, what's the lesson? Hannah sat against the well, crossing her legs and placing her hands in her lap. I'd only learned how vindictive people could be. What did she expect? I learned how hard things were for you. You want me to move forward, but never forget my sins. It had to be what she wanted to hear. Nothing else made sense. Hannah cackled. Where the hell did you come up with that? Well, you tried, but you're as much an idiot as ever. Hannah kept laughing, wiping away tears that didn't exist. Waves of rage washed over me. I couldn't forgive her. She didn't deserve empathy. I crouched low and pounced on her, pinning her light body to the ground. Hannah only laughed harder. God damn it! I struck her with a fist, bruising my knuckles against her skull. You bitch! Why couldn't you have stayed dead? I kept pounding, windmilling in psychotic rage. You deserved all of it. If you had it in you to do this, I should have made your life a living hell. Something broke in my hand, but I ignored it. All the work I did meant nothing. Through the pain, it felt so good, tearing into Hannah. The only thing I couldn't stand was that she never dropped that smug grin. Hannah picked me up by the neck with a lock of hair and launched me into a nearby tree. The impact knocked the wind out of me and sent me sprawling to the ground. You did it! You learned the lesson! Hannah clapped as she stood over me. You didn't change. Nobody does. All the work you did meant nothing. You're the same psychopath that led me to my death. No amount of work will ever absolve you of that. Congratulations. She cheered as my head spun. What? The scenery changed. I was in an unfamiliar forest with the desert and the highway far in the distance. Well, with that, I'm satisfied. Let me just take one little thing as a souvenir. Hannah grabbed my head with one hand and thrust her finger into my eye socket with the other. I howled in agony and pulled away, but her hair held me in place. With a mighty tug, she wrenched my right eye free, and she placed it on her own empty socket, squishing it perfectly. Goodbye, Dee. I think we both learned a lot from all of this. Hannah walked off into the woods, whistling a tune before vanishing behind a tree. I clung to consciousness with the pain, fighting through the terrible pain pounding from my face. With the eye I had left, I saw a couple of squad cars pull off the exit, sirens blaring as they drew closer. I sat against the tree and clutched my wound. As the police arrived, I rested my head against the tree. reflecting on all the pain I had caused Hannah many years ago. That pain caused me so much guilt. It took a decade to forgive myself, but Hannah must have been right, because at that moment, I just wished I'd hurt her more. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to click subscribe and check out some more stories here.